What if war was never meant to be won? What if fear wasn't a byproduct of conflict, but the very purpose of it? And what if the greatest threat to freedom wasn't an enemy at the gates, but a system that needs enemies to justify its existence? George Orwell's 1984 is often read as a distant warning about authoritarianism, but it is more than a work of fiction. It is a detailed map of how power can be structured to last forever. At its center is a chilling insight. The most effective forms of control are not maintained through violence alone, but through the deliberate creation of chaos, insecurity, and false stability. In Orwell's world, war is not an event, it is a condition. Surveillance is not a precaution, it is a principle. And propaganda is not persuasion, it is a weapon used to rewrite reality itself. These are not just tools of oppression, they are the foundation of a self-perpetuating system where truth is fluid, peace is dangerous, and obedience is survival. Today we explore a political architecture designed not to govern, but to endure, and how those same mechanisms are alive and evolving in the world today. What happens when fear becomes policy? When history becomes flexible? When war becomes permanent? Orwell gave us the answers. The question is whether we recognize them in time. In 1984, the world is divided among three superpowers. Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia are constantly at war. Yet despite the fighting, nothing ever changes. No country conquers the others, no side wins. The alliances shift, the enemies change names, but the war continues indefinitely. This is not accidental. Orwell shows us a world where war is designed to never end. The goal is not to defeat an opponent, but to maintain a constant state of emergency. The war absorbs excess resources, prevents the rise of prosperity that might lead to rebellion, and justifies the constant restriction of freedoms. Most importantly, it keeps people afraid, obedient, and focused on an external enemy, rather than the system that controls them. This model is not confined to fiction. Today, we see versions of this logic at play in the so-called endless wars, as well as in the rhetorical wars on terror, drugs, disinformation, and disease. These are not wars meant to be won, but narratives meant to justify surveillance, censorship, and a permanent expansion of government authority. The enemy remains vague, the timeline stretches on indefinitely, and that is the point. What makes Orwell's system so durable is its engineered symmetry. In 1984, none of the superpowers can defeat the others. They are too evenly matched. Each needs the others to justify its own war economy and political repression. If one were truly destroyed, the system would collapse. Peace would mean asking difficult questions about scarcity, freedom, and truth. To prevent this, the powers enter into a kind of cooperative hostility, a rotating alliance system in which two nations gang up on a third, only for the alliances to change without explanation. One day, Oceania is fighting Eurasia. The next, Eastasia is the enemy. History is rewritten overnight. The population accepts it immediately, because the recorded past is no longer stable, and memory is easily manipulated. This logic parallels modern geopolitical posturing, where alliances shift, enemies are rebranded, and public attention is redirected not based on truth, but strategic convenience. The system depends not on clarity, but on confusion, on an electorate that never pauses to ask, who decided this and why? In Orwell's world, war is only one part of a larger mechanism of internal domination. It works alongside two other pillars, surveillance and propaganda. Surveillance ensures that no one steps out of line. Citizens are watched at all times, even in their homes. Any deviation in behavior, speech, or even facial expression can be punished. Propaganda shapes what people believe. It rewrites history, manipulates language, and blurs the line between truth and fiction until individuals can no longer trust their own memories. War then acts as the justification for both. You must be watched to prevent sabotage. You must believe what you're told to keep the enemy from winning. These elements reinforce one another, forming a self-sustaining cycle. Surveillance detects dissent. Propaganda explains it away or eliminates it from memory. War justifies both. And so the system never needs to declare an emergency. The emergency is constant. In the present day, This system no longer looks like jackboots and telescreens. It looks like metadata, targeted misinformation, algorithmic filtering, digital censorship, and mass psychological manipulation. It looks like being told to trade liberty for safety without ever seeing the danger directly. Perhaps the most terrifying idea in Orwell's work is this: true stability is achieved not through peace, but through the illusion of threat. Peace in his world is dangerous. Peace would mean questioning why people are hungry, why they have no rights, why they are being watched. It would lead to demands for change. So instead, the system manufactures a reality where danger is always present, where enemies are always at the gate, and where obedience is always the only reasonable response. This principle applies wherever fear is used to suppress freedom, silence dissent, or expand authority. If people believe the world is too unstable, too dangerous, or too complex to be understood, they will surrender their rights in exchange for protection, and they will do so willingly. Orwell's genius was to show that control does not require truth, it only requires belief. If you can control what people fear, you can control what they accept. What Orwell describes is not just a totalitarian state, but a method, a repeatable strategy of control that works through the careful construction of perpetual crisis. It is not bound to a time or ideology. It is a machine that can be replicated in any era, with new tools and new language, but with the same devastating effect: a population that cannot imagine freedom because it cannot imagine anything else. We must not read 1984 as prophecy. We must read it as diagnosis, a mirror held up to the systems that shape our present. When wars are waged with no clear end, when enemies are reshuffled without explanation, when fear becomes a constant and truth becomes a choice, then we are not simply moving toward Orwell's vision. We are already living inside its framework. The danger is not that these tools exist. The danger is that we forget why they are used and for whom.